The story doesn't begin on September 11, 2001. It begins years earlier, inside a windowless room at CIA headquarters, where men in suits whispered about threats that could change the world forever. Among them was Mark Rossini, a sharp FBI agent assigned to shadow the CIA's Alex Station, the unit built solely to track Osama bin Laden. Rossini wasn't supposed to know everything, not in that room. The CIA played by its own rules, jealously guarding secrets, even from the FBI. But late nights and endless files revealed cracks in the official story: names, photographs, travel records. Two Saudi men, Nawaf al-Hazmi and Khalid al-Midhar, slipped into the United States under the CIA's watchful eye. Rossini was stunned. Why hadn't the FBI been alerted? His job was to stop terrorists before they struck, yet here was proof: two men tied to Al-Qaeda, living openly in America. The CIA brushed it off with coded smiles and evasions. Need-to-know basis, they said. But Rossini couldn't shake it. Why would the CIA risk keeping this from them? Unless it wasn't negligence at all. Unless there was another mission underway, one so secret that even the Bureau was shut out. The files hinted at something chilling: the CIA wasn't just observing these men. They were circling them, almost like recruiters searching for assets. Rossini's instincts screamed danger. Because if these men weren't informants, then they were something far worse: time bombs waiting to go off. Rossini kept digging, quietly, cautiously. In the dim glow of a desk lamp, he found evidence that the CIA had tracked Midhar to a high-level Al-Qaeda meeting in Kuala Lumpur. Photographs, intercepted calls, coded notes, it was all there. And yet, nothing had been passed to the FBI. Instead, the documents were hidden, redacted, filed away under layers of sensitive operations. Rossini began to realize he wasn't just looking at intelligence, he was looking at ghost files, information meant to vanish in the maze of bureaucracy. One night, a CIA officer leaned close and whispered something Rossini would never forget: "You're not here to stop this. You're here to watch." That single sentence froze him. Watch what? Watch who? The hijackers? His stomach turned. If the CIA was attempting to flip Midhar and Hazmi, to turn them into double agents, then Rossini was staring at a high-stakes gamble with innocent lives in the balance. The thought that his own government might allow terrorists to roam free for a chance at deeper infiltration gnawed at him. Because what if they lost control? What if the operation spiraled into chaos? The silence of those halls, the weight of classified folders, the uneasy glances from colleagues, all pointed to one conclusion: something was terribly wrong. By early 2000, Rossini's unease had hardened into dread. The FBI should have known immediately about Hazmi and Midhar's arrival in Los Angeles. Instead, the Bureau was blind. Rossini tried to raise the alarm, but every attempt was met with cold stares and tighter restrictions. Then came the rumor of a meeting, one that, officially, never took place. According to whispers inside Alex Station, CIA officers had arranged back-channel contact with Midhar, probing him for cooperation. Rossini never saw the reports, but he saw the aftermath: frantic phone calls, sudden changes in surveillance, unexplained budget requests. It all pointed to the same terrifying possibility: the CIA had gotten too close. They weren't just tracking the hijackers. They were handling them. Rossini felt trapped. To speak out meant risking his career, maybe his life. To stay silent meant watching a shadow play unfold, knowing something catastrophic was coming. Each time he walked past the door to the director's office, he imagined shouting the truth, blowing the whistle. But he never did. And with each passing day, the men at the center of this mystery inched closer to their final mission, one that would burn itself into history. Summer in America was supposed to feel safe, but Rossini knew better. He had pieced together enough fragments to see the outline of a storm. Midhar and Hazmi weren't hiding, they lived openly in San Diego, even appearing in the phone book. They took flying lessons, rented apartments, used credit cards. It was almost as if they believed no one would dare stop them. To Rossini, that was the biggest red flag of all. Terrorists normally went underground, but these two behaved with bold indifference. Why? Unless someone powerful had assured them they were untouchable. He confronted a CIA contact over beers one night. The man's eyes narrowed. "Leave it, Mark. You're not cleared for that operation." Operation. The word hit like a hammer. So it was true. The CIA was running a covert play, grooming the hijackers for reasons Rossini couldn't begin to guess. Yet the plan was unraveling. Every report, every surveillance log suggested the agency had misjudged their pawns. Hazmi and Midhar weren't drifting toward cooperation, they were sliding deeper into radical networks. And still, the Bureau was kept in the dark. Rossini lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, imagining skyscrapers burning, airports in chaos, bodies on stretchers. The images felt like prophecy. But without proof, his voice was just one more murmur drowned in the endless halls of Langley. By 2001, tension at Alex Station was unbearable. Whispered arguments broke out between analysts. Some wanted to alert the FBI before it was too late. Others insisted the mission was too sensitive, that exposure would destroy careers and international alliances. Rossini watched the bureaucratic knife fight with growing horror. His gut told him this wasn't just about intelligence, it was about ego, pride, and control. The CIA had invested too much in their false flag gamble to admit failure. To admit the hijackers had slipped their leash would be to admit blood on their hands. The silence became poisonous. Case files vanished. Requests for information were denied. Phone calls went unreturned. Rossini realized he was being frozen out, treated as a liability. A colleague whispered to him in the hallway, "If you value your badge, stop asking questions." But Rossini couldn't stop. He felt trapped inside a nightmare where the clock ticked louder each day. He could see the outlines of a disaster, but the details blurred like smoke. The only certainty was that something irreversible was coming. And then, one August morning, he stumbled upon a report buried in a classified channel. It mentioned flights, training, and a timeline that chilled him to the bone. For Rossini, the nightmare had finally taken shape. In late August 2001, the CIA quietly informed select officials that something big was coming. But the warning was vague, almost deliberately so: no names, no specifics, no locations. It was like whispering fire in a crowded theater without pointing to the flames. Rossini begged his superiors at the FBI to press for answers. "We have men in this country tied to Bin Laden. We need to act now." But he was met with silence, bureaucratic shrugs, and the same infuriating phrase, "Not our jurisdiction." Jurisdiction? Rossini thought. What good were rules if thousands of lives hung in the balance? Every instinct screamed that the walls were closing in, that the hijackers were preparing to strike. But the system he had sworn to serve, was paralyzed by secrecy and arrogance. On September 10th, Rossini left his office with a knot in his stomach. He told a colleague, "If something happens tomorrow, it won't be because we didn't see it. It'll be because we were told not to." The next morning, the world shattered. September 11th dawned with a sky too blue, too calm, as if mocking the storm about to break. Rossini sat at his desk, fighting the gnawing sense that this would be the day. He scanned news feeds, radio chatter, interagency cables, anything that might confirm his fear. Then the first call came: a plane had struck the North Tower of the World Trade Center. At first, people muttered about pilot error. But Rossini knew better. His blood ran cold. Minutes later, the second plane hit. The room around him erupted, phones ringing, agents shouting, screens flashing live footage of fire and steel collapsing into smoke. Rossini's heart pounded as he whispered the names: Hazmi, Midhar. The faces from those ghost files now lived in the burning towers of Manhattan. He felt a nauseating clarity: the CIA had gambled with fire, and the fire had consumed thousands. As the Pentagon was hit and Flight 93 fell in Pennsylvania, Rossini couldn't move. His colleagues rushed out, called families, prepared for war. He just sat, staring at the horror on screen, realizing the very men he had tried to warn about had carved themselves into history. And somewhere, deep inside Langley, he knew there were people who had expected this, who had thought they could control it, even use it. The silence he had endured for years was now echoing across the entire world in smoke and screams. In the days after the attacks, Rossini barely slept. Manhattan was cloaked in smoke, families carried photographs of the missing, and the FBI scrambled to piece together the hijackers' trail. And there it was, in black and white, Nawaf al-Hazmi and Khalid al-Midhar. The very names the CIA had hidden. Rossini felt rage boiling inside him. These weren't abstract files anymore. These were men who had trained, planned, and executed the deadliest attack on American soil, under the nose of U.S. intelligence. And the Bureau, the one agency that could have stopped them, had been deliberately kept blind. Inside FBI headquarters, whispers spread. Some agents said the CIA had withheld the intel out of arrogance. Others suggested darker motives: covert recruitment gone wrong, a false flag operation that spiraled into catastrophe. But no one spoke aloud what they feared most: that the government had gambled with lives, and lost. Rossini walked past walls covered in photos of the dead, firefighters, office workers, children on planes. Each face stabbed at his conscience. He had known. He had tried. And still, the truth had been buried under red tape and secrecy. For the first time in his career, Rossini wondered if loyalty to the system was a lie, if the real enemy wasn't just abroad, but hidden in the shadows of his own government. Weeks later, Rossini was summoned into a closed office. A superior sat him down and said the words like a blade across the throat: "You will never speak of what you saw at Alex Station. Not to the press. Not to Congress. Not to anyone." It wasn't a suggestion. It was a command. Rossini stared at the man across the desk, the weight of bureaucracy pressing down like a coffin lid. He realized then that the cover-up had already begun. Reports were being rewritten, timelines blurred, failures reframed as gaps in communication. He wanted to scream, to stand in front of cameras and say, "We knew. We had their names, their photos, their movements." But one glance at the classified files stacked around him told the truth: he was trapped. Bound by oath, by threat, by fear. The official story of 9/11 was already being sculpted into stone. And Rossini? He was being erased from it. At night, he walked the empty streets of D.C., the weight of 3,000 ghosts following him. He replayed every moment, every ignored warning, every silenced question, and realized the truth might never be told. But deep down, he made a silent vow. Someday, somehow, he would speak. As the years passed, Rossini carried his silence like a curse. He watched the official narrative harden into textbooks and speeches: intelligence failures, communication breakdowns, unimaginable tragedy. But Rossini knew better. It hadn't been unimaginable. It had been foreseen, and then buried. Sometimes, in quiet moments, he'd hear whispers in the back of his mind: agents who had warned, analysts who had seen, officers who had stayed silent. He wasn't the only one carrying the secret, but few had the courage to risk their careers, their reputations, their lives. He spoke carefully to trusted friends. Off the record. Late-night bars, dim corners. He hinted that the CIA hadn't just withheld intel, they had played a game with it. That Hazmi and Midhar weren't ignored, they were handled, toyed with, maybe even groomed. And every time he said it, he saw the same reaction: fear. No one wanted to believe that their own government had danced with the men who killed thousands. No one wanted to admit that the blood of 9/11 wasn't just on the hijackers, it might have been on American hands too. Rossini's nights grew darker. The truth weighed heavier. And the ghosts of September kept whispering, "Tell them. Tell the world." 2 decades after the towers fell, Rossini finally reached his breaking point. He watched younger agents join the bureau, full of idealism, unaware of the rot he had seen at the core. He watched politicians invoke 9/11 to justify wars, surveillance, and endless secrecy. And he knew, if he stayed silent, the lie would live forever. So he spoke. Not to the newspapers. Not to Congress. But in interviews, podcasts, quiet documentaries, where his voice could slip through the cracks of censorship. He told his story, that the CIA had tracked the hijackers, that they had kept the FBI blind, that they may have even tried to recruit them. The reaction was explosive. Some called him a hero. Others branded him a traitor. Official agencies dismissed his claims as misremembered events. But those who had lived in the shadows with him, the analysts, the whistleblowers, the silenced, nodded quietly. They knew he wasn't lying. Rossini didn't want fame. He wanted accountability. He wanted answers to the same questions that haunted him since that first file crossed his desk. Why had the CIA played this game? Who gave the order? And how many lives could have been saved if they hadn't? The questions echoed louder than ever. Now, when Rossini tells his story, he speaks with the weary voice of a man who has seen too much. He doesn't claim to have every detail, every answer. But he knows this, the official story of 9/11 is not the whole truth. He describes the silence at Alex Station, the withheld files, the orders to stand down. He talks about Hazmi and Midhar, the 2 men who should have been stopped, but weren't. And he warns that if the truth stays buried, history will repeat itself. Sometimes, he pauses and stares into the distance, as if replaying the moment when he first saw their names on paper. The names that became fire and rubble. The names that became ghosts. And then he asks the question that no one in power has ever answered. Was 9/11 a failure of imagination, or a failure of intention? The room falls silent. The audience shifts uncomfortably. Because deep down, everyone knows what Rossini knows, sometimes the most terrifying conspiracies aren't whispered in secret. They're hidden in plain sight, disguised as incompetence, wrapped in silence. And the silence of apartment 23 at Langley still lingers, heavy as ever, 20 years later.